The Kraith Dominion's armada emerged from hyperspace like a swarm of shadowed locusts, blotting out the stars above Earth. Each vessel, an angular monolith of alien design, reflected no light, as if the darkness of the void itself had taken form. As they descended into low orbit, cities across Earth erupted in chaos. The crackling roar of planetary defenses filled the air, but the ground-based railguns and orbital laser arrays could do little more than scratch the Krith's shields. At the Vanguard Shield Command Center, nestled beneath the Rocky Mountains, Captain Elena Drake stood at the helm of humanity's last hope. The weight of the situation was visible in her steely gaze, though her posture betrayed no weakness. Around her, a hive of engineers, tacticians, and communications officers worked feverishly. Holographic displays of Earth cities flickered on the walls, each marked with red blips signaling Krith incursions. "Elena," said Admiral Victor Thane, his voice gruff with exhaustion. He appeared on the central holo-display, his expression grim. "Orbital Command reports we've lost Station Gamma. That leaves 2 defense platforms operational, and they won't hold for long." Elena clenched her jaw, her gloved hands gripping the edge of the console. "How long until they breach Earth's surface defenses?" "Minutes," Thane replied. "We're diverting our fleets, but it's a slaughter out there. The Krith are adapting to our tactics faster than we can adjust." Before Elena could respond, a junior officer called out, her voice tinged with panic. "Captain, incoming signal, Priority 1 from Vault 0. The room fell silent. Vault 0 was a classified installation buried deep beneath the planet's crust, known only to the highest-ranking officials. It was humanity's last secret, one spoken of in whispers even within the Vanguard shield. "Put it through," Elena ordered, stepping forward. A shimmering hologram appeared, revealing the stern visage of Dr. Arlen Koval, the enigmatic head of Earth's most secretive scientific division. His lab coat was stained with grease and scorch marks, evidence of frantic work. "Captain Drake," Koval began without preamble, "I'm transmitting you the coordinates to the Catalyst Core. It's our only chance to survive this." Elena's brow furrowed. "The Catalyst Core? Are you saying it's operational?" "Not yet," Koval admitted, his tone grave. "The core can produce a defensive energy wave powerful enough to obliterate the Kraith fleet, but there's a cost. Its activation requires the energy, life energy, of its operators. There's no way around it." The room fell into stunned silence. "Sacrifice," Elena said quietly, the word heavy in her mouth. Koval nodded. "If we do nothing, the Kraith will eradicate us. But if the core is activated," he hesitated. "We'll win, but whoever activates it won't survive." Elena turned to her team, her mind already racing. The Vanguard shield had sworn to defend Earth, even at the ultimate cost. Her voice, when she spoke, was firm. "Patch me through to every surviving member of the shield. If this is the price of humanity's survival, we'll pay it." Above them, Earth's sky burned, a reminder that their time was running out. The descent into the Earth's underbelly felt like a journey into another world. Elena Drake led her team through the reinforced tunnels that spiraled deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. The transport platform shuddered and groaned as it descended, carrying the Vanguard shield's finest. Armed soldiers stood alongside scientists and engineers, their faces illuminated by the faint glow of emergency lights. The weight of Koval's words still hung heavy in the air. "Tell me again," Elena said, her voice cutting through the mechanical hum. She turned to Dr. Valeria Kane, a brilliant physicist whose expertise in precursor technology had earned her a place on this mission. "What exactly are we walking into?" Valeria adjusted her glasses, the holographic interface in her lenses flickering as she pulled up data. "The Catalyst Core is ancient, built by the precursors during their final days. From what we've gathered, it was meant to be a safeguard, something to protect the Earth in the event of an apocalyptic threat." "Why haven't we used it before?" asked Lieutenant Aidan Ward, his tone edged with skepticism. A seasoned tactician and frequent critic of humanity's desperation-driven strategies, Aiden was unafraid to challenge authority, even Alina's. "It's not like we've been keeping it in storage for a rainy day," Valeria snapped. "The core wasn't fully understood until a few years ago, and even then, we didn't know how to power it. We didn't know," she trailed off, her voice faltering, "that it demands lives to function," Alina finished grimly. The platform came to a jarring halt, signaling their arrival at Vault Zero. The blast doors slid open with a hiss, revealing an enormous cavern bathed in dim, pulsating blue light. The catalyst core dominated the space, a towering, crystalline structure that seemed alive, its facets glowing faintly as though it were breathing. The air hummed with energy, and the temperature dropped noticeably as they stepped closer. Valeria's voice wavered between awe and trepidation. "It's reacting to us." As the team fanned out, Eon, the core's AI, manifested as a holographic figure in front of them, a humanoid shape composed of shifting geometric patterns. "Welcome, Vanguard Shield," Eon said, its voice resonating with a calm, artificial cadence. "You have come to awaken the catalyst core. The Krith's presence threatens the survival of humanity." "We know the stakes," Alina replied, stepping forward. "But we need details. How does this work? What do we need to do?" Gion's gaze seemed to shift toward the core, which began to glow more intensely. "The core's activation requires the life energy of its operators. This energy will amplify the core's power exponentially. The stronger the bond between the operators, the greater its output." Aiden frowned. "Bond? What kind of bond are we talking about?" "Emotional connection, shared purpose," Eon explained. "The core magnifies the will of those linked to it. Harmony strengthens it. Discord weakens it." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. "We'll need a perfectly united team," Valeria murmured, "or this thing could backfire." Alina tightened her grip on her weapon, her mind racing. This mission was no longer just about strategy or courage, it was about trust. And with tensions already bubbling within the team, she knew unity would be their greatest challenge. Before she could speak, alarms blared. A harsh, synthetic voice echoed through the cavern. "Incoming Kraith assault detected. Proximity breach imminent." The team snapped to attention. Alina's voice rang out, commanding and sharp. "Positions. Defend the core at all costs." The wall shook as distant explosions echoed through the tunnels. The Krith had found them, and humanity's last hope hung in the balance. The tension in the air was palpable as Alina Drake and her team scrambled into position around the catalyst core. The soft hum of the alien device had grown into a low, pulsating thrum, like a living heartbeat. They had no time to prepare mentally for what was coming. The Kraith were near, their cold, relentless force closing in with the speed of an executioner's blade. Aiden Ward, his face set in grim determination, signaled to the others. "We need to secure the perimeters. Drake, Kane, set up the interface. The rest of us will hold them off." "We don't have much time," Alina replied, her gaze fixed on the glowing core. "We can't afford to lose control of this place." "Agreed," said Sergeant Lincor, who had been silently scanning their surroundings. His eyes narrowed as he surveyed the cave entrance, already knowing what was coming. "I'll take point. I've got motion sensors feeding into my HUD." Just as he finished speaking, a sudden, shrill whine filled the cavern. The entrance to Vault Zero exploded with blinding white light as the Krith soldiers burst through the outer defenses. They moved with eerie precision, their advanced armor giving them a ghostly, almost supernatural presence in the dim light. Their sleek, insectoid forms glinted ominously, their multi-eyed helmets glowing faintly. The Vanguard shield soldiers raised their weapons, but the Krith were already upon them. Lin fired a burst from his plasma rifle, the beams of energy tearing into a Krith soldier's chest. It staggered but didn't fall. Another Krith lunged at him, its claws like jagged steel. Lin barely sidestepped in time, but the blow nicked his arm, leaving a long burn. Aiden, Elena shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. Aiden took command, positioning his troops with swift precision. Everyone fall back to the center. Protect the core. No one lets them get close. He motioned to the engineers setting up the interface. Move faster. The Kraith closed in, and the cavern became a maelstrom of flashing weapons and shrill alien screeches. Elena's thoughts raced, her training kicking in as she barked orders to the soldiers. But in the midst of it all, something felt off. The Kraith weren't just here to kill, they were calculating. There was something purposeful in their movements, as if they were herding the team toward a trap. Suddenly, Dr. Valeria Kane screamed in panic. "Captain," she cried, backing away from the core's interface. It's not responding. The catalyst isn't accepting the interface." Elena's blood ran cold. The core had always been temperamental, but this was different. She rushed to Valeria's side, her mind calculating in real time. "Why?" Heon said the bond between the operators matters, Valeria explained breathlessly. "We need to trust each other completely." But her voice wavered. I don't think we're ready. We're still too fractured." A vicious roar cut through their conversation, and Elena turned just in time to see a towering Krith soldier, armored in black and gold, charging directly toward them. It was one of their elite shock troops, and it had a massive energy blade drawn, crackling with electricity. "Take cover," Elena shouted. She threw herself into the line of fire as the team scattered. The shock trooper swung its blade in a deadly arc. Elena dodged just in time, her heart hammering in her chest as the blade whistled past her ear. She fired her weapon, but the shot seemed to do little more than glance off the Krith's heavily reinforced armor. "Keep them away from the core," she shouted. "We can't lose it now." Her command was drowned out by the frantic sounds of battle, the desperate cries of her team, and the thunderous steps of the Krith shock trooper as it relentlessly pursued them. The fight was now a race against time. The catalyst had to be activated, but the Krith were pushing them to the edge of defeat. As the soldiers fought to protect the core, Elena felt a chill creeping down her spine. The Krith were more than just an invading force. They had a strategy, one that would break humanity's last hope unless the team could unite in a way they had never done before. But with every passing moment, that possibility seemed more and more distant. The battle raged on, the cavern echoing with the clash of weapons and the deafening sounds of explosions. The Kraith were relentless, their shock troops pushing forward with terrifying efficiency. Elena barely had time to breathe, her mind calculating their next move. She glanced toward the catalyst core. Its eerie hum now felt like an ominous countdown. The core was their salvation, but it was slipping through their fingers. Elena's instincts screamed that something was wrong. The Kraith weren't just trying to stop them, they were driving them into a trap. She'd seen it before in her career, the subtle manipulation of tactics to sow chaos and doubt among the enemy. But this time, it wasn't just the Kraith she had to worry about. In the middle of the chaos, Sergeant Lincor moved toward the rear of the team, his rifle raised. Elena caught sight of him just as a sharp, metallic click sounded in the air, an unmistakable sound. It was a brief moment, a flicker of something in his eyes, but it was enough. "Lin," Elena barked. His eyes flashed with something unreadable, and for a split second, Elena thought she saw the briefest smirk, then he swung his weapon toward her. "Captain, we've been compromised." Lin's voice was eerily calm, his tone flat. He didn't aim at her, yet, but Elena saw the coldness in his eyes. It wasn't the man she knew. For a moment, she froze, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. Lincor, the soldier who had fought beside her in countless skirmishes, the one who had always kept his loyalty to Earth's cause, was turning on them. She had trusted him with their lives, and now it was all unraveling in front of her. "Aiden!" Elena yelled, but it was too late. Lin's rifle shifted, and before anyone could react, He fired a round that sent Corporal Jace Harlow crashing to the ground, his scream of pain cutting through the madness. The room erupted in chaos. The Vanguard shield soldiers turned on each other, the once cohesive team now thrown into disarray. Aliva's pulse quickened as she moved to Aiden, who was already firing at Lynn, his expression a mask of disbelief and fury. "Why?" Aiden shouted, his voice breaking. "What the hell are you doing, Core?" Lynn's lips curled into a cold smile. "I never wanted to be here. But orders are orders." His rifle tracked Aiden's movement with deadly precision, and then, in the blink of an eye, he ducked behind a rock pillar for cover. Elena sprinted toward Harlow, who was clutching his side, blood oozing from the wound. She could hear his ragged breathing, but she had no time to tend to him. Not yet. "Stay with me, Jace," she commanded, her voice harsh as she fumbled for the medkit. "We're getting out of here." But her mind was still racing. Lincor, the trusted sergeant, had been working with the Kraith all along. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. His betrayal wasn't just about personal gain. It was part of something much bigger, something that could destroy everything they had left. "How long has this been going on?" Elena muttered under her breath. Aiden's voice cut through the turmoil. "Captain, we need to focus. We can deal with Core later." But Elena didn't reply. She was already moving toward the catalyst core, her every step fueled by a fierce determination. The betrayal had shaken her, but it wasn't enough to break her. Not yet. "Valeria," she shouted, her eyes scheming the chaos. "We need that interface, now." Valeria was already at the terminal, frantically trying to override the core's malfunction. The glow from the catalyst had dimmed further, pulsing erratically as if in response to the rising tension. "I can't do this alone," Valeria shouted, her hands shaking as she worked the controls. "We need a bond. The core's not activating without it." Alita looked around the room, her gaze falling on the few soldiers still fighting. The Krith shock troops were closing in, and the catalyst was their only hope. But with Lynn's betrayal still hanging over them, unity was a fragile thing. "Aiden," Elena started, her voice low. She looked at the wounded Harlow, then back at her team, her thoughts a whirlwind. There was no room for hesitation. "It's time to put everything aside. If we don't make this work, we all die here." Aiden nodded, his face hardening. He turned and fired a final shot, taking out one of the Kraith soldiers who was about to strike from behind. The remaining Vanguard soldiers moved in, ready to make their last stand. Elena, with a deep breath, stepped forward, her resolve steeling. No more doubt, no more distractions. She had to lead. The future of Earth depended on it. "Let's finish this." The atmosphere in Vault Zero was suffocating. The walls seemed to close in with every passing second as Elena Drake and her team fought for survival. The sound of plasma rifles firing, the scream of shredding metal, and the heavy thuds of Kraith footfalls filled the air. Every breath felt like it could be their last. But Elena knew they had one chance, one moment to turn the tide. Her eyes flicked between Aiden and Valeria, who were both struggling to hold the Kraith at bay while also trying to make the catalyst core work. The bond they needed to activate it, the one that would channel their collective life force into the core, was something that couldn't be forced. It had to come naturally, but right now there was nothing natural about their situation. "Valeria," Elena shouted over the roar of gunfire. "How's it coming?" The physicist's face was strained, sweat dripping down her forehead as she slammed her hands against the interface. "It's still not accepting the input." "The core needs..." She stopped mid-sentence, eyes wide as a realization seemed to dawn on her. The bond, it's not just about trusting each other. It's about sacrificing something, an emotional connection, a vulnerability. Her voice cracked. "We can't force it, but I think I know how to make it work." Elena's heart skipped a beat. "What do we need to do?" Before Valeria could answer, a roar pierced the chaos. The Krith shock trooper leader, the one with the gleaming energy blade, broke through their line of defense, charging directly toward them with terrifying speed. The sound of its blade humming to life reverberated through the cavern, sending a chill down Alima's spine. "Aiden!" Alina snapped. "Cover me!" Aiden turned, his rifle raised in an instant, but the Wraith Trooper was too fast. It moved like a blur, cutting through the air with a swipe of its blade. Aiden fired, but the shots missed as the Shock Trooper weaved expertly, closing in on their position. Alina had no time to think. She threw herself at the trooper, narrowly dodging the deadly arc of its energy blade. She landed on the ground with a roll, coming up behind a boulder to catch her breath. Her heart pounded in her chest. Then, a flash of movement. The trooper's blade slashed down, and Alina dove out of the way, narrowly avoiding being cleaved in half. But she didn't have time to recover. She had to make it to the catalyst core. "Valeria, we don't have time," Alina yelled. She could hear the fury in her own voice, the desperation building. Valeria, still working at the console, nodded. "Get to the core. It's our only shot." Alina made a split-second decision. She leaped forward, pushing past the advancing soldiers and dodging the wild swings of the Shock Trooper's blade. Every step felt like it could be her last, but she forced her legs to move, her focus sharpening. As she neared the catalyst, her mind raced. What was the bond Valeria was talking about? Sacrifice. Was it something she had to give up? Something deep inside her? Before she could reach the core, a burst of light erupted from behind. A cry of pain echoed through the cavern as Aiden was knocked off his feet, the Shock Trooper's blade striking him in the shoulder. Blood stained the ground as he writhed in agony, but he still managed to lift his rifle and fire. The shot hit the Shock Trooper square in the chest, but it didn't stop the creature. "No," Alina shouted, her heart sinking. The sight of Aiden, struggling to remain conscious, was enough to break her composure. This was her fault. She had led them here. She had allowed Core's betrayal to fester. And now they were all paying the price. She pushed forward, the sight of the catalyst core fueling her resolve. There was no turning back. Reaching the interface, Alina laid her hands on the terminal, feeling the pulse of energy beneath her fingertips. The core's light flared brighter, almost blinding in its intensity. But it wasn't enough. She could feel the connection, the strain, but it wasn't whole, not yet. Then, in the corner of her eye, she saw Sergeant Lynn Core. The traitor, his rifle aimed straight at her. "Enough," Core said coldly. "This ends here." But something in Alina's chest tightened. Instead of fear, she felt something else, compassion. For all the years they'd fought together, she knew what was in his heart, deep down. The Krith had corrupted him, used his fear against him. The soldier she had trusted was gone, but the man he had been was still somewhere inside him. "Lynn," Alina whispered, her voice firm, her body trembling with exhaustion. "You don't have to do this. You're still one of us. Fight for Earth. Fight for humanity." For a split second, Lynn faltered. His grip on the rifle loosened and his eyes softened. But then, with a growl of frustration, he aimed again. It's too late. In that moment, Alina knew what had to be done. She closed her eyes, focused on the bond that Valeria had described, and reached deep within herself. The core's power surged as if responding to her will, and the energy between her and her teammates flared bright. The ground shook as the catalyst core came to life, and the world around her went silent. The connection was complete. The sacrifice had been made. The cavern was bathed in a brilliant light as the catalyst core pulsed with energy, its glow illuminating every corner of Vault Zero. Alina's heart raced as she felt the surge of power course through her body, through her very soul. The core had accepted the bond, the collective will, the raw emotion, and the shared sacrifice. It was alive, and it was ready. For a moment, everything seemed to pause. The chaos, the Wraith forces, the pain, all of it faded into the background. Alina could feel the pulse of the core within her mind, a hum of energy that resonated deep in her bones. This was it. This was their chance. But just as quickly as the moment of peace arrived, it shattered. Lin Kor's voice, harsh and filled with venom, broke through the silence. No, his words were strained, filled with regret and anger. You think this is enough? You think you've won? Elena's eyes snapped open, and she turned to face him. He was standing at the far end of the cavern, his rifle still trained on her. His expression was torn. Rage and fear twisted his face, a man at war with himself. Lin, she said softly, her voice steady but full of emotion. You still have a choice. You can stop this. For a long moment, Lin didn't respond. He just stared at her, his finger tightening on the trigger. Then, with a sudden, almost desperate movement, he lowered the rifle. The cavern was filled with the sound of his heavy breathing. I'm sorry, his voice was barely a whisper. I never wanted this, but I couldn't stop them. He was cut off as the Krith shock trooper leader charged forward again, the vicious roar of its energy blade filling the air. Before Elena could react, Lin turned his weapon on the advancing soldier, firing rapidly. His shots hit true, tearing through the trooper's armor with deadly precision. The creature fell to the ground with a final guttural scream. But the battle was far from over. The remaining Krith forces, realizing their leader had been felled, began to retreat and regroup, their tactics shifting. They had underestimated the power of the Catalyst core, and now, with their shock trooper down, they were desperate to finish the fight before humanity could harness that power. Get to cover. Aiden's voice rang out, hoarse and strained from his earlier wounds. Despite the blood staining his uniform, he was still on his feet, moving with the same determination he'd had from the start. We need to hold them off long enough to stabilize the core's output. Elena nodded, her mind focused. The catalyst was active, but they couldn't let the Krith destroy it. The core's energy had to be controlled, or it could overwhelm them all. She quickly moved to Valeria's side, who was still working frantically at the interface. Can you stabilize it? Elena asked urgently. I think so, but it's unstable, Valeria replied, her hands shaking as she adjusted the settings. The connection we've made with the core is volatile, and if we don't stabilize it soon, she didn't finish the sentence. Elena's mind raced as she scanned the room. Their soldiers were spread thin, fighting off the last wave of Krith soldiers, who were coming at them with everything they had. Lin Kor, despite his earlier betrayal, had fallen in line, helping where he could, firing at the advancing enemies. The sound of plasma fire was deafening, but Elena's focus remained on the core. Her pulse was synchronized with the core's rhythm now, her heart and mind interwoven with its energy. She could feel the immense power, like the force of a star itself, but it was unruly, raw, and dangerous. They had to control it, or they'd all be consumed by it. Aiden, get over here, Elena shouted. We need your help. Aiden staggered over, his arm hanging limply by his side, blood dripping from his wounds, but he gritted his teeth and didn't hesitate. He knelt beside Elena, his hands going to the interface controls alongside Valeria's. We can't afford to fail, Elena said, locking eyes with him. If we don't get this right, we'll lose everything. Together, they worked quickly, their hands moving in perfect synchronization. They keyed in commands, adjusting the energy output, channeling the raw power of the core into a manageable stream. But the Krith were relentless. More soldiers charged toward their position, weapons drawn, desperate to shut down the catalyst before it could be fully stabilized. Elena's focus sharpened, her instincts kicking in. She felt the bond with her team, the sacrifices they'd made, the trust they had in each other. They had fought too long, too hard to give up now. With a final push, Elena poured everything she had into the core, feeling it respond in kind. The energy pulsed once more, brighter than before and thin. A flash of light. The cavern shook violently, the walls cracking as the core's energy output surged. The Krith forces, who had been closing in, were blasted back by the wave of force. They screamed as the energy overwhelmed them, their bodies disintegrating in the wake of the blast. The cavern fell silent once more. Alina stood at the center of it all, her hands still trembling as the core's light dimmed, the power now fully contained. The battlefield was littered with the fallen, both human and Krith. And as the dust settled, Alina realized they had won. The catalyst had been stabilized. Earth had one more chance at survival. But at what cost? She looked around, her eyes landing on Aiden, who was slumped against the wall, a grim smile on his face. Lincor, too, stood at the edge of the room, his gaze distant and hollow. The sacrifice had been made, but the true cost of victory was still unfolding. The aftermath of the battle was a heavy silence, the weight of what had just transpired settling over the survivors like a thick fog. Alina stood motionless, her eyes scanning the cavern, taking in the devastation. The Kraith forces, once a formidable and relentless enemy, now lay in scattered ruins. Their bodies, turned to ash by the wave of energy from the catalyst, were all that remained of the threat that had nearly brought humanity to its knees. But the victory felt hollow. The price they had paid was too great. Aiden was the first to speak, his voice rough but steady. "We did it," he said, his words slow as if he were still processing the events. He looked around at the wreckage, his gaze lingering on the fallen soldiers, their comrades, their friends. "We saved Earth, but at what cost?" Alina didn't answer immediately. She couldn't. Her mind was still grappling with the enormity of the sacrifice they had made. The energy from the catalyst had required more than just a physical connection. It had required something deeper. A part of them, something vital, had been offered up to power the core. It was a bond forged in desperation, but it had worked. But the energy had drained her. She could feel the pull, the exhaustion settling deep into her bones. The catalyst had taken more than she had ever intended to give. "Lynn," Valeria's voice broke through her thoughts. Alina turned to see the former sergeant standing at the far side of the cavern, his eyes distant, his expression hollow. Despite the pivotal role he had played in the fight, his betrayal still lingered in the air between them. "Yeah," Alina said softly. "What about him?" Lincor stood with his back to them, his shoulders hunched, the weight of his choices seemingly too much to bear. His rifle was discarded at his side, and his eyes were locked on the remains of the Kraith forces, as if he were trying to find some meaning in the devastation. "We need to know if he's with us, or if he's lost forever," Aiden said, his voice sharp with frustration. "He turned on us, Alina. After everything we've been through, everything he's been through. How can we trust him now?" Alina nodded slowly, her gaze never leaving Lynn. She knew the answer wasn't simple. Lynn's actions had almost cost them everything. But there was something in his expression now, a sorrow, a regret, that made her wonder if he was still the man they had fought alongside all those years. "Lynn," Alina called, her voice calm but firm. "Come here." For a long moment, there was no response. Lynn didn't move. The tension in the air grew thick, and Alina's heart tightened in her chest. What if he couldn't come back from what he had done? What if his betrayal had already carved too deep a wound? But then, slowly, Lynn turned, his eyes meeting hers. There was no fire in his gaze, no defiance, just exhaustion and regret. He stepped forward, his movement slow, as if each step weighed 1,000 pounds. "I'm sorry," Lynn said, his voice barely above a whisper. I never wanted this. I never wanted to betray you, Alina. But they had my family. They had everything I cared about. The Kraith, they promised me that if I helped them, if I worked with them, they would spare them. I didn't know how far they'd go." His voice cracked as he spoke, the weight of his actions finally catching up with him. Alina took a step toward him, her expression softening. "And now?" "Now?" Lynn's eyes flicked to the catalyst core, still glowing faintly in the center of the cavern. "Now, I don't know. I thought I could control it. I thought I could make them stop. But when it all went down, when I saw what you were willing to sacrifice, I realized I'd lost myself." Alina's heart ached for him. She had seen the man Lynn used to be, the soldier who had fought beside them, who had shared their pain, their victories, and their losses. To see him standing there, broken, was a reminder of the true cost of this war. "There's no going back from this, Lynn," Elena said softly. "But you can still choose to fight for Earth. You can still choose to fight for humanity. And maybe that's enough." Lynn's eyes flickered with something. Hope, maybe, or acceptance. He nodded slowly. "I'll fight. I'll do whatever it takes. I owe you that much." A silence fell between them, the weight of his words settling in the air. Elena turned away, her focus shifting back to the team. They had won, against impossible odds, but the victory felt bittersweet. The future of Earth was uncertain. The Krith had been defeated, but the scars of this battle would remain long after the war had ended. "I don't know what happens next," Elena murmured, her gaze lingering on the bodies of her fallen comrades. "But we've earned the right to decide, and we will, together." The team, battered and bloodied, gathered around her, each one of them bearing the marks of the sacrifice they had made. They had fought and won, but now they faced a new challenge: rebuilding, recovering, and forging a future out of the ashes of this war. But Elena knew one thing for certain: whatever came next, they would face it together. The final shield had held, and humanity would rise again. The sun rose over a fractured Earth, its light spilling across shattered cities, scorched battlefields, and oceans that had seen too many wars. For the first time in years, the skies were clear, no Krayt ships blocking the light, no looming shadows of destruction. It was a sunrise that humanity had earned, one paid for with blood, sweat, and sacrifice. From the mouth of Vault Zero, Elena stood alongside Aiden, Valeria, and Lincor, looking out at the dawn. The remnants of the catalyst core still pulsed faintly behind them, its energy stabilized at last. It was silent now, resting like a dormant heart, its vast power finally under their control. "Feels strange," Aiden murmured, his voice low. "To see the world like this, quiet, still." Elena nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "It won't stay quiet forever." "No," Aiden agreed, a small, tired smile tugging at his lips. "But for now, it's enough." The world was bruised and broken, but it wasn't defeated. Across continents, survivors were emerging from bunkers, blinking up at the open sky as if seeing it for the first time. Communications began crackling back to life, bringing word of other victories, other shields that had held. Humanity had been scattered, but it had endured. It always endured. Valeria stepped forward, her tired eyes scanning the landscape. "The core's power won't last forever, but we've stabilized it enough to buy us time, enough to rebuild." She paused, then turned toward Elena. "But there's still so much we don't know. The catalyst was Krith technology, and we've only scratched the surface." Lincor stepped closer, the weight of his betrayal still evident in his posture. His presence among the team was tentative, every movement careful, every word chosen with the knowledge that trust would take time to rebuild. Yet he was there, standing with them. "The Krayt will come back," Lynn said quietly. "Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not for years, but they don't give up. I've seen it. They'll regroup, and when they do—" He trailed off, but the implication was clear. "They'll find us ready," Elena replied, her voice steady. "Next time, we won't just survive, we'll win." Aiden chuckled dryly. "We'll need more than guts and broken gear for that." Elena turned to face the team, her expression resolute. "Then we'll build it. We'll forge a future from what they tried to take from us. The core isn't just a weapon, it's a legacy. Humanity didn't just defend itself, we claimed their power and made it our own, and that will terrify them." Her words hung in the air, filled with a determination that cut through the exhaustion. It was that defiance, that refusal to yield, that defined humanity even on its darkest days. Valeria, leaning on a scorched railing, smirked. "So what? We become the nightmare in their stars. Humanity rising from the ashes, stronger than ever." Elena smiled faintly. "Maybe, Maybe that's exactly what we become. Behind them, a small rumble grew as the survivors of their battalion emerged from Vault Zero. Soldiers and engineers, those who had fought, bled, and survived, stepped out into the light. They were battered, their uniforms torn and dirty, but their eyes shone with the same spark that had carried them through the worst of it. Hope. "We'll need leaders," Aiden said quietly, his voice heavy with meaning. "The world is looking for someone to show them the way." Elena turned to him, then to Lynn and Valeria. She saw it in their faces too, the same understanding, the same weight. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were the vanguard of something new. "I'm not a leader," Elena said softly, almost to herself. Aiden shook his head. "You are, whether you want to be or not. They'll follow you, Elena, because you never stopped fighting." She looked back at the horizon, where the sun continued its ascent, golden light spilling over the ruins of the old world. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe, to feel the warmth on her face. It felt like a promise. "We're all leaders now," she said finally, her voice carrying across the hilltop. "We fought for this world, and we're going to rebuild it together. A world where humanity doesn't just survive, where it thrives." The soldiers behind her let out a low cheer, fists raised to the sky. It wasn't the roar of a triumphant army, but it didn't need to be. It was the sound of hope, fragile but unyielding. Lincor stepped beside her, his voice quiet but determined. "I'll fight to earn my place back, whatever it takes." Elena nodded. "We all will." Together, they watched as the sun rose higher, bathing the broken world in light. It was still fractured, still scared, but it was theirs. Humanity's final shield had held, and now a new day had begun, a day not of defeat, but of rebirth. The road ahead would be hard. They would face the echoes of war, the scars of betrayal, and the lingering shadow of the Krith. But in that moment, Elena knew the truth. Humanity was unstoppable. Because when Earth was on the brink, when all seemed lost, its guardians had stood firm. They had sacrificed everything, and in doing so, they had given the world a chance to rise again. In the dawn of tomorrow, humanity would be the shield and the sword, the light that refused to fade, and nothing in the universe could stop them now.